Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 1988 British direct-to-video horror movie titled The Howling 4, The Original Nightmare. Now, The Howling 4, The Original Nightmare runs for 1 hour and 34 minutes long. It is directed by John Hough. Even though he was supposed to be solely directing this movie, apparently once that fucking douchebag Clive Turner decided to take over the entire franchise and to make it even more shittier than it has been before. Well, John Hough decided, you know what, fuck this. I don't want my name or credit in this involved in this movie. This is no longer my movie. It's all Clive Turner. And so apparently Clive Turner turned everything into shit. Thank you very much, Clive Turner. Alright, the script was written by Freddie Rowe, and once again we got Clive Turner back in to stick his hand paws in. Because ever since, it's already bad enough that after the first movie, this franchise had pretty much gone to shit. But it actually got worse once Clive Turner took over at creative control and just completely made this whole entire franchise fucking unwatchable. Oh, and yeah, Clive Turner gets credit for the story. But however, he won't get credit for the novel it is based on. It is based off of the novel by Gary Brandner. Oh, by the way, they wanted to make this movie stand out to be more accurate to Mr. Brandner's novels, his series. But did they really do that? Highly unlikely. Alright, the soundtrack was done by David George, Barry Gard, and Justin Hayward, who composed the theme song this to this bullshit of a movie with this god awful 80s type pop rock song called Something Evil. Something dangerous. Yeah, Justin Hayward, we like you better when you're like with the Moody Blues and performing songs like Nights in White Satin, Never Reaching the End. Never reaching the end. Letters I've written, never meaning to send. Okay, I can't sing like him. He's a great singer. He's part of the legendary band, the Moody Blues. Been part of the group since the late 60s. I think he and John Wright are the only two surviving members of the group. Not too long ago, we lost Mike Pinder, God rest his soul, and to all the other former members of the group. Hey, stay strong, Justin Hayward. We like you. We just didn't like this theme song. All right. The cinematography was done by Godfrey A. Godar, and it was edited by Malcolm Burns Arrington and Claudia Finkel. And the stars of the movie are Romy Windsor, Michael T. Weiss, Anthony Hamilton, Susanne Severeid, Lamya Derval, Norman Anstey, Kate Edwards, Dennis Folbigge, Anthony James, Dale Cutts, and William Forsche. So, okay. Sure, I know that after watching the original Joe Dante 1981 version of The Howling, it was all downhill from there. The sequel just could never measure up. Now, I'm not saying that the original Howling was Shakespeare or was going to be some kind of life changing way I look at the world. That movie wasn't going to change my life at all. But at least I'll say one thing. At least the original version of The Howling, the Joe Dante one, is still the best of the bunch. I mean, it had a good thing going for it, and maybe in the long run, I think that The Howling as a standalone movie would have done just fine. And as for the rest of the sequels, you could just take them into the trash, have like a little campfire, and burn these little fuckers to the ground. Because let's face it, after The Howling Part 1, the other 7, 8 sequels that followed, or I think there's also a couple of reboots or some mini-series based off of them, they're not worth your time. Go find yourself something else better to do. Or if you are curious and you want to watch the movies, I'm not stopping you, but hey, you've been warned. And while the second and third installments, I will say, were obviously inferior, because this whole franchise was a piece of shit, at least the second and third ones kind of entertain me to some extent, with some wild and wacky humor to go along with the scares and the insanity behind it all. But it seems like after the first movie, they decided to sort of step away from from werewolves as a whole. I mean, in the second one, it was all about vampires. It sure was quite cool that in the sequel, Christopher Lee had some pretty badass sunglasses. But they were focusing mostly on vampires and less about big, hairy, wolf human hybrid creatures who, if they bite at you, chances are you're gonna become a fucking werewolf. And then the third one, it was all about marsupials. Ahem. Marsupials are not a relative of werewolves. Werewolves are a combination of human wolf hybrids. And they only come out during full moon, which comes once every 28 days. But all in all, this movie was absolute positive shit. I'm sorry to say. What does this one have? Oh yeah, it isn't about vampires either. It's more about creepy ghost nuns. That's right. The main scares aren't the wolves. Nah, you just leave the wolves in the kennel. It's all about creepy ghost nuns who seem to materialize and then vanish. This fourth, and besides that, the fourth installment of The Howling falls flatter than a pancake. Is it the worst of the franchise? As much as I would like to think it's the worst of the franchise, uh, wait till you get to part 7, where I'm gonna really go ballistic. You guys are gonna have to carry me out because I'm probably going to flip my lid. No, maybe I'll try not to. I have drama coming soon, so I'll try my best to be calm. Maybe at least not going to a point where I'm gonna go insane. And besides, I've seen a lot of shit in my lifetime, so why should I flip my lid off? Okay, one of the main reasons why it lacked one of the reasons why this movie falls flat was because it lacked any kind of originality. They were trying to make this movie more authentic to Gary Brandner's novels, his series, but instead all they were doing was just redoing the original Joe Dante Howling and everything was just unoriginal. It was all just a bunch of rehash without without the charisma, without the budget, and without the decency and performances. Oh, sure, the original Howling had B-list actors in there too, sure. That's fine, I understand. But at the same time, this movie just lagged on for what was to be a 94-minute movie, felt like a 2 hour and 34-minute long movie. That's how bad it was. This fourth installment of The Howling, its initiative wants to be more true to the novel by Gary Brandner. But was there any payback for their effort? Not in the slightest. Not exactly, because a lot of the charisma Joe Dante put in the original Howling was lost in this mundane remake of the first installment. Not only that, the movie does do some modifications to change things around, which makes this movie hypocritical in its own oath. This is all just a remake of the original Howling. Just watered down, without the originality, the effects, or even the humor from the first installment. Hey, you know what? A lot of horror movies does deliver quite its fair share of dark humor. And I'm okay with that. In fact, I love me a little bit of humor to go with the narrative. I mean, when I watch a slasher movie or when I watch a horror movie that has, 10, 20 people dying, I wouldn't mind a few clever, humorous quips here and there. This one takes itself way too seriously. And it actually felt like a high schooler rewrote the original script for The Howling because it seems like these actors who were involved in this movie didn't even know what the fuck they were doing. But then again, it was probably due to the incompetence of the script, or if there even was a script. And yeah, I mean, even the technical stuff like the gore, the effects, the acting, it just sucked the life out of the Joe Dante original movie. I mean, when you watch this movie, you would say to yourself, I was better off with Joe Dante's 81 movie and just burned the rest of the other eight sequels that followed. Or was it seven? I don't know. I think after New Moon Rising, I just gave up. I don't know how much more I could have took. So, our leading protagonist is a writer by the name of Marie Adams, played by Romy Windsor, who seems to be traumatized by not just werewolves, but creepy ghost nuns, um, just about anything. I mean, she's not this strong, independent type either. And while okay, maybe not all movies have to have strong, independent, empowered women who can handle things on their own and don't need a man to be there to help them. They don't need to be damsel in distresses. No, that's fine. I understand. But she was just way too clingy and way too mousy to even really care too much about her. And sometimes the way she presents herself is kind of weird. Like at the beginning, after she was talking to her friend agent, who also seems to drive her around from place to place, and is almost like like a substitute on the side from her actual married husband, Richard. who doesn't show too much support for her. In fact, I'm gonna go more into him later. He was a real fucking douchebag, if you ask me. Yeah, he was. I will get more into that. Yeah. So eventually, she was having her little press conference with her friend. She ends up looking at a fire and sees all of a sudden a werewolf figure or in the fire starts to manifest. She breaks down into a blood curdling scream, and next thing you know, she's placed in a mental asylum. And then the psychiatrist tells her husband, Richard. I thought at first her husband was Tom. Uh, Tom Billings, played by Anthony Hamilton. But then he tells her real husband, Richard, played by Michael T. Weiss, that that she needs to go on some kind of a retreat, like a vacation sort of, to just simply ease her mind and just simply get away from it all. Just kick back for about a week or two. Never mind doing all the city stuff. Get out of the office for a while and just relax. Don't bring your work to this island, this area, whatever it's called. Drago. Yeah, they go to a town called Drago. And she's supposed to just kick back, relax, spend a couple of weeks in a cabin, practically being bored out of your mind. Jeez, if being secluded away, jeez, nothing to do to entertain herself. What you gonna do to occupy yourself? I think if I was to get away into some cabin in the middle of nowhere, I think I would probably go even more insane than compared to being in the city. At least I'm not completely isolated. But, and just when you think that maybe her problems would be solved, no. In fact, her delusions of seeing creepy ghost nuns and werewolves have actually gone from bad to even worse. And it didn't help that the town that she lived in, the occupants, all seemed to be somewhat hiding something. Everyone. From the antagonistic sheriff who loves nothing more than to antagonize people, to the owners of the general store, to the doctor, to some gothic chick who who runs a boutique shop of her own personal creations. Anyways, she's supposed to take a break from being in the big city of Los Angeles to just some quiet cottage in the middle of nowhere. But this was supposed to calm her down, but it didn't. So she seems to be traumatized by werewolves. I wonder why. Oh yeah, because it's a werewolf movie. Silly me. They took out the famous killer from the Dante adaptation and his motives from the plot. So she has premonitions of events that haven't occurred yet and total strangers she met before. There was really any decent folks out there, and even sometimes to a point where even she and Richard, their relationship was not really like up to par from the get go. In fact, there were more times when she felt more genuinely comfortable with Tom than she did with Richard, which probably kind of makes sense because Tom always seems to be somewhat more helpful towards her, and Richard just practically kind of mocks at her at every time, and sometimes comes to a point where he starts to get completely fed up with her and her vampire type, no, werewolves obsessions to a point where he's getting just more and more annoyed by her every time. The only other decent character in this movie would probably be maybe a person who was like a fan of hers. Her name was Janice, played by Susanne Severeid. She was a ex nun who left the convent because her best friend, Sister Ruth, seems to be missing in action. So she traveled far and wide to look for her. And she apparently decided to quit the convent to go look for her. But she shows her a picture of her standing next to this Sister Ruth. This Sister Ruth is the exact same person that Marie has been seeing many, many times before. I also mentioned she was also a number one fan of Marie and her books. And to know more about this town, they decided to go do some Scooby Doo mystery solving stuff to sort of piece together like the whereabouts of Sister Ruth and what is she here to try to tell her. Of course, the people in this town are not very good at, at hiding things, especially when when Maria and Richard walk into the general store owned by Mr. and Mrs. Olmsted. They were like, "Ooh, looks like we got some visitors here." Mr. Olmsted was like, "Oh, I see." So then the Olmsteds had to sort of play off as, lovable, friendly people, treat them with hospitality because that's the way how humans like. But if they start to get too suspicious, then we will attack. And then these other people are just trying to sort of be the same way too. The doctor who um who has been treating Marie with these pills also sometimes tries very difficult to conceal the fact that there is something wrong with the people in this town and they're not who they seem they are. And then also you have this very cute, adorable puppy His name is Pierre, and oh my god, he was just so incredibly adorable. But it was just too bad that we didn't get to see enough of Pierre. Because unfortunately, in this movie, the poor fella eventually. Well, he went missing. And then she asked Sheriff Douchebag if if he knows the whereabouts. But him being just a antagonistic asshole would he would say something smarmy. I don't exactly remember, but he would be like, I'll be out on lookout if I do see him. If I do see your dog. And then she was walking through the forest on her way back to her cabin. She at first thought she saw creepy Sister Ruth, but then it turns out it's the gothic girl at the knickknack store. What's her name again? Eleanor. Yeah. She suggested for her to cross some kind of like a almost like a rope bridge for a shorter route, and then all of a sudden she comes across a cave, and from there she sees the severed head of her dog Pierre. She confronts Richard about it, but he goes out and goes to this cave to see if this is actually is Pierre's head. But instead, it turns out that all he saw was some really creepy white, pale faced doll, which is still just as creepy as fuck. So then all of a sudden, it's like, this is what I found. So then she runs into some hikers who are hanging around the area. One of them got injured, so she bandaged up her injured foot. And she asked him if she had seen her dog Pierre, and he said, I didn't, but if I do see if I do see him or see any sign, you'll be the first to know. And so then they go out in the forest, and what happens next? They get killed by these werewolves. And of course, all the deaths in this movie are off screen, which is fucking bullshit. I like on screen deaths, not off screen. Okay, this is not preschool. I'm not gonna get traumatized or barf in a bucket or something. Of course, at night she's always hearing these howling and screeching noises, and it comes to a point where it happens almost every time either Richard's asleep or when he wants to get laid. How how there's something really disturbing about Richard too. I mean, he goes off to LA to do some kind of I don't know what is his job, like a fashion designer, I think, or something like that. He comes back to LA, he brings back a gun, and he also shows her a dead rabbit. And so they make so then they're having rabbit stew for lunch, for dinner, whatever. Okay, so he's the mullet head Elmer Fudd, I guess. Oh. He killed that wascally Webbit. So then when he finally decides to step outside, oh yeah, to go pick up some supplies at the general store and also slam a couple of beers at a bar. He goes out, suddenly he meets Gothic girl. He and Eleanor start, making out in the woods behind her back. So he's cheating on her. And then he starts questioning and judging Marie if she's actually, getting seductive with her new bestie. Hey, remember, this is back in the 80s. Back in the time when people think that two girls who are best friends with each other who have a similar bonding is synonymous with being lesbians. And also because of the fact that when he was showing off gun shooting gun shooting routine, and he seems to be pretty good. Marie couldn't shoot to save her fucking life. Oh, but Janice, she could just outdone them all. I mean, she did her bullet practice so good that it actually took the decoy thing right off its rope. So she's pretty much got great survival skills. And of course, back in the 80s when people thought that women are athletic was synonymous with being LGBT. Of course, we know that kind of narrative is no longer thought of today, but back then, yeah. So, eventually, so now he's questioning her when yet he's been outside behind her back screwing around with Evelyn, the gothic storekeeper. Ugh. And then Janice does some more sleuthing about how there is a bell tower in this town of Drago. And according to an old Romanian tale, that if you can ring the bell in a bell tower, it could lure the werewolves inside the tower, and you just gotta burn down the place in order for you to defeat it. I thought actually maybe just I thought originally maybe the way to defeat a werewolf, I should say, is by putting a silver bullet to its head. But no, that's too easy. That's too cliche. Nah, just bring all these motherfuckers into a bell tower, burn the place down. Give it a good old Molotov cocktail, and then just blow the fucking place up, and all the werewolves will likely die. So one night he decides to go out to get a bit of fresh air. He once again meets Eleanor, tries to get another blowjob from her, and then all of a sudden she bites at him really impactfully. He comes inside the cabin and he's all like really totally fucked up. I mean, he's badly wounded. I mean, so much so that he's almost like near death. So then she gets a doctor. I think she fucking needs the doctor. She needs is an ambulance. I mean, he needs to go straight to a hospital, not to some doohickey town clinic. But however, the doctor, cleans him up, and he starts saying things like, "Oh, there was no bite marks. He fell down a gully." No, he didn't. No, he did. He got fucking bitten alive by Eleanor, who actually can transform herself into a werewolf. In fact, now that the cat's out of the bag, this whole town is surrounded by werewolves. And they really start to take their form by the time we get to the climax. So apparently, by the time you get to the climax, Tom shows up at her house or her cabin, and and then all of a sudden, a bit of a physical altercation happens between Richard and Tom. He punches the lights out of Tom. Tom's like, "Okay, fuck this, I'm out of here." He goes over to Janice to see, like if there really is a story of werewolves. And she's like, "We better go and warn her about her, because she's in danger." I mean, she we find out more that the license plate from the hiker's camper. At first, we thought maybe these campers came all the way from New York, because we saw a couple of license plates from New York, but it turns out that those license plates went to a couple whose last names were Brooks. And it is revealed that this Sister Ruth, that's her actual name, Sister Ruth Brooks. And it appears that her parents, who were once the former owners of that cabin before Maria and Richard settled in, they were giving them the warnings to leave now before it's too late. Then all of a sudden, Tom and Richard eventually get into another scuffle, and Tom gets killed. And then probably, maybe in my opinion, maybe one of the coolest scenes, maybe the only part of this movie that I actually enjoyed watching, was when poor Richard started to melt. That's right, he fucking melted. So I guess in order for the transformation from a human to a werewolf, you must have your skin shedded to a point where your whole body, your whole skin starts melting into a big pile of goo till you're all skeletal shaped, and then all of a sudden you become a werewolf. And I think this transformation is probably maybe one of the coolest transformations I've ever seen. And I think a lot of their money came from this scene alone. I mean, the only really exciting stuff happened was maybe like the last 10 minutes of the movie. Really. I mean, the first 60, 70 minutes of this movie was all about settling in and developing things. And the only time we really ever come to anything exciting is near the climax, when it should have been, capturing our attentions from the beginning. I was kind of expecting, kind of like a Slim Pickens to come around as the sheriff. Instead, we get a discount ripoff of a sheriff to take his place. The eccentric lady who ran a store selling knickknacks and antiques replaces the strange hippie lady from the original Howling. I mean, the character Eleanor, to my opinion, was just a ripoff of Elvira, if you ask me. Not only that, she's just a home wrecking bitch for seducing Marie's husband, Richard. I mean, sure, Richard would feel better off with someone else than Marie because he pretty much couldn't stand Marie any much longer. When in the original movie, he started it all. Later on, Richard transforms into a werewolf by melting into a big pile of goo. Wow, talk about cheap effects here. But at least I thought that was entertaining. And then when we go to the bell tower where Janice was supposed to do the deeds by doing the thankless role by ringing the tower to lure the werewolves in. Why do I keep thinking vampires? The werewolves in so that they can all come after her, and if you set the place on fire, all the werewolves will disappear. All the werewolves will be killed off. I mean, it came to a point where I guess the leading werewolf was what the fuck? The doctor. I mean, that doctor just practically rips open his face to reveal that he's a werewolf and that this whole town is full of werewolves. Even though they don't fully always materialize into werewolves, sometimes they morph into like like wolves with big bright red eyes or green eyes. And very only briefly do they materialize into their full werewolf size. So then, Marie gets into some truck, places some kind of flames, and goes kind of Molotov cocktail onto the bell tower and kills off all the werewolves, including Marie, who was never a werewolf, but she eventually had to play the sacrificial goat just to save Marie. And then all of a sudden, the ending comes when a werewolf was coming after Marie. She screams, and then we go to freeze frame, and then back to Justin Hayward's "Something evil, something dangerous." Yeah. Personally, I couldn't stand that Elvira reject. What the fuck's her name? Eleanor. For the way she just practically home wrecked the relationship between Marie and Richard, even though they were pretty much almost on the rocks. I know it ran under a shoestring budget, but did it have to be so obvious that it wasn't trying to prove us wrong? So the climax ends when Marie lures the werewolves into the church and arranges to burn it down. The same church that they built after ringing the bell that got carried all the way from, I said Bulgaria originally, but now I'm starting to think, no, it wasn't Bulgaria. It was Romania. That's what it was. Did I go or did I go? I don't know. Marie gathers them in, but she just stands there and lets them attack her. So how am I supposed to be sympathetic to someone who's just plain stupid? It just doesn't make sense. Yeah, these follow ups to the original are really bad, but this one is right up there amongst the worst. Not the worst. Seven's the worst, which I will be reviewing soon. It didn't really feel like a horror, but more like a mystery with horror elements and cheap special effects. Yeah, it was pretty much, piece to piece together some mysteries, you know, Scooby Doo shit. Even though even though Scooby Doo actually does have better executed plots in their narratives, and they could get away with that, and that's just coming from an animated an animated series. This one should have been 10 times better than Scooby Doo stuff, but it's actually worse. Because at least with Scooby Doo, I can actually invest in these kind of mystery stuff. This one I couldn't. The sad part is there really isn't anything mysterious about this movie. We knew from the beginning that the town where Marie and Richard were retreating from is crawling with werewolves. Because primarily it's part of the Howling franchise. So we're bound to get werewolves somewhere down the line. Why it took so long for it to develop, I don't know why. But everything from the acting, direction, the production values, and the special effects are all fucking cheap and uneventful. And even worse, there were hardly any werewolves. I mean, by the time we got some werewolf action is around the 70-minute mark and only on for about a few seconds. The only time exciting things take shape is during the last 20 minutes. And this one very good scary werewolf just stood there and did absolutely nothing. I mean, I think that was when the doctor was standing by a bunch of candles and a pentagram and was transforming himself into a werewolf, but all he did was just look absolutely ridiculous. Another thing that's convoluted to the story was the church and the bell tower. It seems like the werewolves from this town Marie and Richard were staying at took the bell all the way from Romania and placed it in the story. Seriously, you gotta be fucking kidding me. So does this mean that these werewolves were asking to be dead? Is that what you're trying to tell me? So were they asking to be killed? I mean, it would be almost similar to like vampires building a water fountain laced with garlic powder and holy water. This movie has no action, mystery, or even logic. Even the werewolves don't look like werewolves, but large dogs with glowing red eyes. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, this is a terrible movie. I wouldn't recommend it on anybody. And if this movie contained no survivors, I would just say, nah, whatever. This movie was a piece of shit. I didn't care for the characters. I didn't care for the direction. I didn't really care too much about this movie. I mean, really, this whole franchise went up in shit after the original Joe Dante's 1981 movie. I mean, if you want to see a Howling movie, just see the original one. And like I said, fuck the rest of the other installments. So when all is said and done, if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would give The Howling 4, the original Nightmare, a 2 out of 10. Man, this movie pissed me off so much. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. By the way, I'm not in a bad mood. And even after watching this movie, which should make me into a bad mood, I'm not in a bad mood. But I also like to at the same time thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. Just remember the 3 simple rules: be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I'll be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Carrot Rider saying, keep watching those movies and I'll see you around. Goodbye.